Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center and watched the final report stream in from reconnaissance teams scattered across the border regions. 6 Zilithian star systems had gone dark, and their signatures had been replaced by the unmistakable gravitational readings of black holes. The weapon had worked exactly as designed, and the devastation was absolute. 4 billion Zilithians were gone, and their military infrastructure had been completely destroyed. The remaining Zilithian systems had ceased all military operations within hours of the first collapse. Their bioships had retreated to defensive positions around their homeworld, and were broadcasting surrender signals on every communication frequency. The Zilithian High Hierarch sent message after message begging for a ceasefire and offering unconditional terms. The tone of desperation in those transmissions was impossible to miss. President Lisa Harper convened an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly to discuss the terms of Zilithian surrender. Representatives from every colony and every nation gathered in the Great Hall to debate what humanity's response should be. Some argued for total occupation of Zilithian space. Others demanded reparations that would cripple their economy for generations. A few voices called for mercy and restraint, but those voices were drowned out by calls for justice, Commander. Jake Morrison had returned to Earth and was asked to testify before the assembly about what he had witnessed at New Haven Colony. He stood at the speaker's podium and described in detail the systematic murder of 50,000 innocent people. He showed images of the destroyed shelters and the burned remains of homes. He played audio recordings of the final messages sent by colonists as they realized they were going to die. The assembly hall was silent when he finished. Harper took the podium after Morrison and addressed the gathered representatives. She spoke about the responsibility that came with possessing weapons like the Stellar Killer. Humanity had demonstrated that it could destroy entire solar systems and that power came with a terrible burden. The galaxy was watching to see what Earth would do next. Would humanity become conquerors who used their weapons to dominate others, or would they prove that the destruction of the Zilithian systems was a justified response to genocide and nothing more? The debate lasted for 3 days, and the arguments were passionate on all sides. In the end, the assembly voted to accept the Zilithian surrender with conditions. The collective would pay reparations to the families of New Haven victims. They would establish memorial stations at each of the 6 collapsed star systems. They would open their territory to human observers who would ensure they never rebuilt their military to threatening levels. And most importantly, they would broadcast across the galaxy a full admission of their crimes and an acknowledgement that humanity's response had been justified. The Zilithian High Hierarch appeared on every view screen across human space to deliver that admission. The aliens' bioluminescent patterns flickered with colors that the translation computers labeled as shame and fear. The Hierarch spoke about the terrible mistake the collective had made in attacking New Haven. They had believed humans were weak because they sought peace. They had not understood that choosing peace and being capable of war were 2 different things. The galaxy watched that broadcast and drew their own conclusions. Dozens of alien species that had previously dismissed humanity as insignificant suddenly became very interested in establishing diplomatic relations. Trade offers flooded into Earth's embassies. Non-aggression treaties were proposed by governments that had never acknowledged human existence before. The message was clear. Humanity had proven itself to be the most dangerous species in known space, and everyone wanted to be on friendly terms. Dr. Helen Morris retired from government service 3 months after the war ended. She moved to a small research station on the edge of human space where she spent her remaining years trying to find a way to reverse stellar collapse. The mathematics suggested it might be possible to stabilize a collapsing star if the intervention happened early enough. She never succeeded, but the work gave her some measure of peace. She died 15 years later, and her funeral was attended by hundreds of scientists who had worked with her over the decades. Captain Ryan Foster returned to active duty but requested a transfer away from intelligence operations. He was given command of a diplomatic escort vessel and spent the next 20 years helping establish peaceful relations with alien species across the frontier. He never spoke publicly about his role in Operation Daybreaker, but the weight of what he had done never left him. In his private journals, he wrote about the conflict between duty and conscience and wondered if the deaths of 4 billion beings could ever truly be justified. The ruins of New Haven Colony were preserved exactly as they had been found. The United Earth government declared the entire system a protected memorial site, and prohibited any development or salvage operations. A massive monument was constructed in orbit around the colony world, with the names of all 50,000 victims inscribed on panels that stretched for kilometers. Visitors came from across human space to pay their respects and remember what had been lost. 6 additional monuments were built at the locations where the Zilithian star systems had existed. These were more controversial because they commemorated the deaths of 4 billion aliens. Some humans argued that the Zilithians deserved no memorial after what they had done. Others believed that remembering the cost of war was important, even when the dead were enemies. The monuments were built despite the controversy, and each bore a simple inscription about the price of genocide. Commander Alex Turner took a position training new intelligence officers at the military academy on Mars. He taught classes on reconnaissance tactics and strategic planning, but he also taught about the ethics of warfare. His students learned about the importance of accurate intelligence and the consequences of miscalculation. Turner used the Zilithian War as a case study in how quickly conflicts could escalate when both sides misunderstood each other's capabilities and intentions. The Zilithian collective never recovered its former power. The loss of 6 star systems and 4 billion people left scars that lasted for generations. Their remaining population lived under the watchful eyes of human observers, and their economy struggled under the weight of reparation payments. Some Zilithians harbored resentment toward humanity, but most simply wanted to rebuild their lives and avoid any action that might trigger another human response. Younger Zilithians who had been children during the war grew up in a society forever changed by what had happened. They learned about the attack on New Haven and about the terrible retaliation that followed. Many of them worked to establish better relations with humanity and to ensure that the mistakes of their elders were never repeated. Cultural exchange programs were started, and some Zilithians even moved to human colonies to study and work alongside the species their government had once tried to exterminate. Admiral Sullivan retired 5 years after the war and wrote her memoirs about the decision to deploy the stellar killer weapon. The book was controversial and generated intense debate about military ethics and proportional response. Sullivan defended her decision but acknowledged the moral complexity of what had been done. She argued that the Zilithians had forced humanity's hand by planning to exterminate every human colony. The choice had been between allowing millions of humans to die or ensuring that no species would ever attempt such an attack again. The scientific community debated the implications of stellar collapse technology for decades. Some researchers wanted to continue developing the stellar killer as a deterrent against future threats. Others argued that the weapon was too dangerous to exist and should be dismantled. In the end, the Earth government decided to maintain a small stockpile of the devices, but placed them under the strictest controls in human history. No single person or government could authorize their use. Any deployment would require unanimous approval from the United Earth Assembly. Other alien species attempted to develop their own versions of the stellar killer technology but found the physics far more complex than they had anticipated. Human scientists had made breakthroughs in quantum field manipulation that other species had not achieved. This technological advantage became another factor in humanity's growing influence across the galaxy. Species that might have challenged human expansion decided that cooperation was a better strategy than confrontation. The war changed humanity in ways that went beyond military power. Before the conflict, humans had been uncertain about their place in a galaxy filled with older and seemingly more advanced species. After demonstrating what they were capable of when threatened, that uncertainty disappeared. Humans walked through the galaxy with a quiet confidence that came from knowing they could defend themselves against any threat. Trade routes expanded, and human colonies spread to new star systems. The population living in space grew exponentially as people sought opportunities on frontier worlds. Earth remained the cultural and political center of human civilization, but the colonies developed their own identities and contributions. Humanity was becoming a true spacefaring species, and the destruction of New Haven had paradoxically accelerated that transformation by proving that humans belonged among the stars. The dust on New Terra never settled properly. Jake Sullivan had learned this fact during his first week on the planet, and now after 3 years of digging through ancient ruins, he still found the red particles clinging to everything he owned. He brushed his hand across the stone tablet in front of him and watched as centuries of accumulated dirt fell away. to reveal markings he had never seen before. The symbols were definitely old galactic, but something about them seemed different from the usual administrative records he found in these ruins. Jake had come to New Terra as part of a human archaeological team studying the remnants of pre-Empire civilizations. The Galactic Empire funded such expeditions reluctantly, and only because the ancient sites sometimes contained technology that could be exploited. For humans like Jake, this was one of the few ways to earn respect in a galaxy that treated his species as little more than useful laborers. Humans were good at solving problems and thinking creatively, but the Empire made sure they never received credit for their innovations. The ruins Jake worked in had once been a massive governmental complex according to the initial surveys. Most of the structure had collapsed thousands of years ago, but deep underground chambers remained intact and surprisingly well preserved. His team had been excavating these chambers for months, finding mostly mundane items like furniture fragments and storage containers. Today, however, Jake had broken through a wall that should not have existed according to their mapping equipment. Behind the wall lay a small room that had been deliberately sealed. The air that escaped when Jake first opened the chamber had been stale and undisturbed for what his equipment suggested was over 2,000 years. Inside the room stood a single pedestal, and on that pedestal sat a data storage device of a design Jake had only seen in textbooks. The device was a quantum archive from the early days of Galactic civilization, and if it still functioned, it could contain an enormous amount of information. Jake carefully extracted the device and carried it back to his surface camp. His hands trembled slightly as he connected it to his translation computer. The device powered on immediately despite its age and began displaying files in rapid succession. Jake's screen filled with legal documents written in formal Old Galactic. He started reading the first document, and his eyes widened as he understood what he was looking at. The document was titled Charter of the Galactic Federation, and it predated the current empire by more than 2 millennia. Jake knew basic galactic history. The empire had formed after a long period of warfare and chaos between various alien species. The official story taught in every school was that the empire brought order and peace to a fractured galaxy. But this charter described something entirely different. It described a federation based on cooperation and merit, rather than military domination. Jake read through the charter's main provisions with growing excitement. The document established laws for how the galactic government should function, and more importantly, it defined the rights of all member species. According to the charter, any species that demonstrated superior innovation and problem-solving abilities had the right to challenge the current leadership for control of the government. The challenge had to be formal and based on evidence, but the law was absolute and binding. Another provision caught Jake's attention immediately. If a species could prove they had been systematically oppressed despite making significant contributions to galactic society, they automatically gained the right to assume governance without a challenge. The oppressed species simply had to present their case before a tribunal of all member species, and if the evidence was convincing, the transfer of power was mandatory. Jake sat back in his chair and thought about what he had just read. Humans fit both of these criteria perfectly. He thought about his friend Rick Johnson, who commanded a human defense patrol and constantly complained about how human tactical innovations were stolen by alien commanders. He thought about Lisa Martinez, a human lawyer he had met at a conference who spent her career fighting for basic human rights within a legal system designed to keep humans powerless. He thought about Amy Foster, a doctor he had briefly dated who had told him about medical breakthroughs developed by humans that were credited to alien research institutions for 200 years since humanity joined the galactic community. Humans had been treated as second-class citizens. They were allowed to work and contribute, but never to lead or receive recognition. Human colonies existed on dozens of worlds, but every colony answered to an alien governor. Human ships flew through space, but always under alien authority. Human scientists made discoveries, but alien names appeared on the publications. The pattern was so consistent and so deliberate that it could not be accidental. Jake continued reading through the archive. He found hundreds of legal precedents and case studies showing how the challenge system had worked in the Federation's early years. Several species had successfully challenged for leadership and transferred power peacefully based on demonstrated merit. The system had been designed to ensure that the most capable species guided galactic development, rather than simply the most militarily powerful. Then Jake found something that made his blood run cold. He discovered a document dated just before the Empire's formation. It was a secret memo between the founding members of what would become the Empire. The memo explicitly discussed how to hide the old Federation charter and its laws. The Empire's founders knew about the challenge system, and they deliberately buried it to prevent future challenges to their authority. They had rewritten galactic history to make people forget that a better system had once existed. Jake realized he was holding evidence of the greatest cover-up in galactic history. The Empire was not just oppressive, it was fundamentally illegal according to laws that had never been officially repealed. The old Federation charter was still technically valid because no proper legal process had ever abolished it. The Empire's founders had simply ignored it and hoped everyone would forget. He made copies of everything immediately. Jake was not naive about the dangers of what he had discovered. The Empire would do anything to keep this information secret. He uploaded encrypted copies to servers hidden across human colonies and sent physical copies to people he trusted. Then he contacted Lisa Martinez using a secure channel. When Lisa's face appeared on his screen, Jake did not waste time with pleasantries. He told her everything he had found and watched as her expression changed from curiosity to shock to something that looked like hope. Lisa was quiet for a long moment after Jake finished explaining. Then she smiled in a way Jake had never seen before. She told Jake that she would need time to verify everything and to build a legal strategy. She told him to stay safe and to keep digging for any additional evidence he could find. She told him that if what he had discovered was real and valid, then humans finally had a weapon that could change everything. Not a weapon of war, but a weapon of law and truth. Jake returned to the ruins the next day with renewed purpose. He knew that what came next would be dangerous and difficult. He knew the Empire would fight to suppress this information. But he also knew that sometimes the most powerful force in the galaxy was not military might or political influence. Sometimes the most powerful force was simply the truth and the courage to speak it. Lisa Martinez arrived on New Terra 5 days after Jake's initial contact. She brought with her 2 large cases filled with legal databases and research materials, along with a determination that Jake found both impressive and slightly intimidating. Lisa had spent 12 years fighting legal battles for human rights within the Empire's court system, and she had won more cases than any other human lawyer in history. Most of those victories were small and procedural, but they had taught her how the Empire's legal system worked and, more importantly, where its weaknesses lay. Jake met her at the spaceport and drove her directly to his research camp. They did not speak much during the drive, because both knew that Empire surveillance could be anywhere. New Terra was officially a low-priority world, but Jake had noticed an increase in security patrols since his discovery. Someone was watching, and he suspected his encrypted messages had not been as secure as he hoped. Once inside his climate-controlled research tent, Lisa immediately began examining the data archive. She spent 6 hours reading through documents while Jake made coffee and tried not to pace nervously. Finally, she looked up from her portable screen and nodded slowly. The charter was legitimate, and more importantly, it was still legally binding. The Empire had never formally repealed the old Federation laws, and according to standard legal principles, any law not officially repealed remained in effect. The Empire's lawyers had made a catastrophic mistake by simply ignoring the old system. Rather than properly dismantling it, Lisa explained that proving humanity's case would require evidence in multiple categories. They needed to show that humans had made significant contributions to galactic society, and that these contributions had been systematically suppressed or stolen. They needed to demonstrate human superiority in innovation and problem-solving compared to other species. Most importantly, they needed to prove that this suppression was deliberate and institutional, rather than accidental. The burden of proof would be enormous, but Lisa believed it could be met. Jake suggested they contact Rick Johnson for military evidence. Rick had served in the Human Defense Fleet for 15 years and had risen to the rank of captain despite the Empire's efforts to keep humans in subordinate positions. Rick was currently stationed near the Outer Rim, and Jake knew he kept detailed personal records of every engagement his fleet had participated in. Those records would show the pattern of human tactical innovations being appropriated by alien commanders. Lisa agreed and added another name to their list. She wanted to recruit Amy Foster, a xenobiologist who worked at the Central Medical Institute on the Capital World. Lisa had met Amy at a conference 2 years earlier, and remembered that Amy had complained bitterly about how human medical research was being credited to alien scientists. Amy had proof of this: theft in the form of research logs and publication, records showing how her work and the work of other human researchers had been systematically reattributed. Over the next 3 weeks, the team assembled. Rick Johnson arrived first after requesting emergency leave from his post. He was a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to constantly assess everything around him. Rick brought with him encrypted data files containing 20 years of military records from human fleet operations. The records painted a damning picture of Empire military leadership. In conflict after conflict, human officers had developed innovative strategies that won battles and saved lives. In almost every case, alien commanders had taken credit for these strategies or had claimed they were simply following standard Empire doctrine. Rick showed them one particularly egregious example from a battle near the Calden system. A human tactical officer named Greg Hayes had developed a new formation strategy that allowed a small human fleet to defeat a much larger pirate force. The strategy involved using asteroid fields in ways that Empire doctrine said were impossible. After the victory, the alien admiral in command had claimed the strategy as his own innovation, and Greg Hayes had been quietly transferred to a backwater patrol route. Rick had kept copies of Greg's original tactical proposals, along with communication records proving the timeline of events. Amy Foster arrived last, bringing with her a carefully hidden collection of research data. She was a woman of medium height with tired eyes that suggested too many late nights in the laboratory. Amy had worked on medical projects throughout the Empire, and she had documentation spanning a decade of systematic theft. She showed them cases where human researchers developed treatments for alien diseases, only to have their work stolen by alien institutions. She showed them publication records, where human names had been removed from research papers and replaced with alien scientists who had contributed nothing to the actual work. One case particularly enraged the team. Amy had led a research project that developed a treatment for Zentari respiratory syndrome, a disease that killed thousands of Zentari citizens every year. Her team of human researchers had worked for 3 years on the project and had finally succeeded in creating an effective treatment. 2 weeks before publication, the research director, an alien named Vexen, had removed all human names from the paper and added several alien researchers who had never been involved in the project. When Amy protested, she was removed from her position and transferred to a lesser facility. The Zentari government later awarded Vexen a prestigious medal for his life-saving research. The 4 of them worked together for months, compiling evidence and building their case. They created detailed timelines showing patterns of suppression across every major field of human endeavor. They gathered testimony from hundreds of other humans who had similar experiences of having their work stolen or their contributions erased. They researched Empire laws and procedures to understand exactly how to formally present their challenge. Lisa discovered something crucial during her legal research. The old Federation charter specified that a challenge had to be presented before the Galactic Supreme Council, but it also stated that once a formal challenge was made, the Council could not refuse to hear it. The law required that representatives from all member species be present for the tribunal and that the proceedings be made public. This meant the Empire could not simply suppress or ignore their challenge once it was formally filed. They would be forced to respond in front of the entire galaxy. Jake spent his time gathering historical evidence. He researched every major galactic crisis over the past 2 centuries and found that in almost every case, human innovation or human diplomatic efforts had been crucial to the resolution. He found records of human engineers solving impossible technical problems that had stumped alien experts. He found examples of human mediators successfully negotiating peace agreements between alien species that had been at war for generations. In every case, the human contributions had been downplayed or erased from official records. The team faced increasing pressure as their work continued. Rick reported that Empire intelligence agents had begun asking questions about his activities. Amy discovered that her access to certain medical databases had been revoked without explanation. Jake's research camp was inspected 3 times by Empire officials who claimed to be conducting routine safety checks. Lisa's legal office was broken into, though nothing appeared to be stolen, They knew they were running out of time. The Empire clearly suspected something, and soon they would face direct intervention. Lisa made the decision to finalize their case and prepare for the formal challenge. She spent a week organizing all their evidence into a comprehensive legal brief that ran to over 3,000 pages. The brief documented every aspect of humanity's contributions to galactic society and every example of Empire suppression. It included expert testimony from dozens of human professionals across multiple fields. It contained irrefutable proof that the Empire had violated the fundamental principles of the old Federation Charter. Honor. A cold morning exactly 4 months after Jake's initial discovery, Lisa transmitted the formal challenge to the Galactic Supreme Council. The message included their complete legal brief and cited the specific provisions of the old Federation Charter that gave humanity the right to challenge for galactic leadership. She demanded that the Council convene a formal tribunal within 60 days as required by law. She made it clear that humanity had met every requirement specified in the Charter and that the Council had no legal basis to refuse the challenge. Then they waited. The 4 of them gathered in Jake's research camp and watched as their message spread across galactic communication networks. Within hours, news services began reporting on the unprecedented challenge. Some treated it as a curiosity or a joke, but others recognized the serious legal implications. Legal experts across the galaxy began analyzing the old Federation Charter, and many confirmed that the humans appeared to have a valid case. 3 days later, the Galactic Supreme Council issued an official response. They acknowledged receipt of humanity's challenge and confirmed that under the old Federation Charter, they were legally required to convene a tribunal. The Council set a date 60 days in the future for the formal proceedings. The message was brief and formal, but Jake could sense the anger behind the words. The Empire had no choice but to take humanity's challenge seriously, and that fact alone represented a victory. The journey to the capital world took 8 days by standard transport. Jake and his team traveled together on a human commercial vessel that was old and slow, but offered more privacy than Empire ships. They spent the journey preparing their presentation and reviewing their evidence for what felt like the 100th time. Lisa insisted on running through mock tribunals where the others played hostile questioners, trying to poke holes in their arguments. By the 4th day, everyone was exhausted, but their case had become airtight. The capital world was called Zentrum Prime, and it was a monument to Empire power. Massive towers stretched toward the sky, and alien species from across the galaxy crowded the streets going about their business. Humans were visible everywhere, but always in service positions or menial jobs. Jake noticed human cleaners maintaining the sidewalks and human servers working in restaurants, while aliens conducted business and made decisions. The sight strengthened his resolve because it demonstrated exactly what they were fighting against. The tribunal would take place in the Hall of Unity, an enormous structure at the center of the government district. The hall had been built to host gatherings of representatives from all member species, and it had not been used for its original purpose in over a century. The Empire preferred to make decisions through a small council of powerful alien leaders rather than consulting with the full membership. Now, however, the old Federation Charter forced them to convene everyone. Jake and his team were assigned quarters in a human district far from the government center. The accommodations were basic and clearly designed to remind them of their inferior status. Lisa did not complain and instead used the time to make contact with other human professionals. Living on Zentrum Prime, she found dozens of people willing to testify about their experiences of discrimination and theft of their work. Many were afraid, but Lisa's confidence and the legitimacy of their legal challenge convinced them to participate. Rick spent his time coordinating with human fleet officers across the galaxy. He set up secure communication channels and began organizing what he called contingency plans. When Jake asked what these plans involved, Rick simply smiled and said they were insurance. Jake did not press further because he suspected the answer would worry him, and he had enough to worry about. Already, Amy worked with human medical professionals on Zentrum Prime to document additional cases of research theft. She found that the pattern extended even further than she had realized. Nearly every significant medical advancement in the past 50 years had involved human researchers, but almost none had received proper credit. Amy compiled this information into supplementary evidence that would strengthen their case. The day before the tribunal, The Empire's legal team contacted Lisa. They wanted to negotiate a settlement. The lead prosecutor was an alien named Krath, who had a reputation for ruthlessness in legal matters. Krath offered to grant humans certain additional rights and protections within the Empire in exchange for withdrawing their challenge. Lisa listened politely and then declined without hesitation. Krath's expression darkened, and he warned her that proceeding with the tribunal would have consequences. Lisa replied that suppressing human achievement for 2 centuries already had consequences, and now the Empire would face them. The morning of the tribunal arrived cold and clear. Jake dressed in formal clothes that felt uncomfortable after months of wearing field gear in the ruins. The team traveled together to the Hall of Unity and found crowds already gathering outside. News of the tribunal had spread across the galaxy, and representatives from hundreds of worlds had come to witness the proceedings. Most seemed skeptical that humans could prove their case, but Jake noticed some faces in the crowd that showed support or at least curiosity. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was tense. The chamber was circular, with seating arranged in concentric rings rising toward the walls. Representatives from each member species occupied designated sections, and the room could hold thousands of individuals. At the center was a raised platform where the human team would present their case, and where the Empire's defenders would respond. Above everything hung massive screens that would display evidence and transmit the proceedings across the galaxy. Supreme Chancellor Vextar opened the tribunal with a speech that barely concealed his contempt. He spoke about the Empire's long history of peace and prosperity and suggested that the human challenge was a dangerous distraction from important work. He reminded everyone that the Empire had brought order to a chaotic galaxy and that changing leadership could destabilize everything. His words were carefully chosen to plant doubt about humanity's claims without directly addressing them. Then Lisa stood to present the opening statement. She walked to the center platform and looked around at the assembled representatives. Her voice was clear and steady as she began to speak. She explained the discovery of the old Federation Charter and its provisions for challenging leadership. She outlined how humans met every requirement specified in that ancient law. She promised to present evidence that would prove beyond any doubt that humanity deserved to lead the galaxy. The first day of the tribunal focused on technological innovation. Jake presented historical records showing human contributions to galactic technology. He displayed evidence of faster-than-light communication systems developed by human engineers, but credited to alien corporations. He showed how human programmers had created the artificial intelligence systems that ran most galactic infrastructure. He demonstrated that energy efficiency improvements across the Empire had originated from human research facilities. For each claim, Jake provided documentation, including original research notes, patent applications, and communication records showing the timeline of development. The Empire's lawyers tried to argue that aliens had refined or improved these innovations, but Jake countered with evidence showing that the so-called refinements were minor compared to the original human breakthroughs. The screens above displayed side-by-side comparisons, making it impossible to deny the human origins of the technology. The second day focused on military strategy, and Rick took the lead. He presented case studies from dozens of military engagements where human tactical thinking had been decisive. He showed how human officers consistently outperformed alien commanders in complex scenarios. He displayed communication records proving that alien admirals had claimed credit for human strategies. Rick's presentation was methodical and devastating because he used the Empire's own military records against them. One particularly powerful example involved a defensive action at the Corvan border. A human lieutenant named Paul Griffin had developed an evacuation strategy that saved over 10,000 civilians from a surprise attack. The strategy involved using civilian transport ships in a coordinated pattern that confused enemy sensors. After the successful evacuation, the alien commander had claimed the strategy was his idea, and Paul Griffin was reprimanded for exceeding his authority. Rick had Paul's original tactical proposal with timestamps proving he had submitted it hours before the alien commander claimed to have conceived it. The third day brought Amy to the center platform to discuss medical and scientific achievements. She presented the most emotionally powerful evidence yet by showing how human medical research had saved millions of alien lives. She displayed records of diseases that had been cured or controlled through human efforts. She showed publication records where human names had been systematically removed and replaced with alien researchers. Amy's voice shook with anger as she described researchers who had dedicated their lives to helping others, only to be erased from history. The case of the Zentari respiratory syndrome treatment became a focal point. Amy presented laboratory records showing her team's work over 3 years. She showed experiment logs and research notes all documented with dates and signatures. Then she showed the published paper with alien names listed as the primary researchers, and her name absent entirely. When representatives from the Zentari world saw this evidence, many looked shocked and ashamed. They had celebrated alien heroes while the true heroes had been forgotten. The fourth day focused on diplomatic achievements and resource management. Jake returned to present evidence of human mediators who had resolved conflicts between alien species. He showed examples of trade disputes that humans had settled through creative compromise. He demonstrated how human administrators had improved efficiency and resource distribution across the empire. Each example followed the same pattern of human innovation being either ignored or credited to aliens. Throughout all 4 days, the Empire's legal team tried to undermine the evidence. Krath argued that collaboration made it impossible to assign credit clearly. He suggested that humans were exaggerating their contributions. He claimed that the Empire had provided the framework that allowed human innovation to flourish. But each argument fell flat because the evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Lisa had anticipated every defense and prepared counterarguments supported by irrefutable facts. The 5th day was reserved for closing arguments. Krath spoke first and tried one final time to dismiss the human challenge. He argued that changing galactic leadership would cause chaos and suffering. He painted a picture of human inexperience leading to disaster. He appealed. The tribunal judges retired to deliberate and the wait began. Jake and his team returned to their quarters while the galaxy watched and speculated about the outcome. News services broadcast constant analysis and opinion from experts across hundreds of worlds. Some predicted the tribunal would find in favor of humanity, while others insisted the Empire would find a way to maintain control. The uncertainty was exhausting. But there was nothing to do except wait. 3 days passed before the tribunal recalled everyone to the Hall of Unity. Jake dressed carefully, that morning knowing that whatever happened today would change history. Lisa was calm and focused while Amy looked nervous but determined. Rick checked his communication device constantly, and Jake suspected he was coordinating with his military contacts for whatever contingency plans he had. Prepared, the hall filled quickly with representatives taking their seats and crowds gathering outside to watch on public screens. The atmosphere felt electric with tension and anticipation. Supreme Chancellor Vextar sat in his elevated position looking angry and rigid. Beside him sat Military Commander Zephon and other high-ranking Empire officials who had built their careers on the current system. They had everything to lose from this decision. The head judge was a Valdran elder named Corthan, who had served on the tribunal for 40 years. Corthan was known for his strict interpretation of law and his refusal to be influenced by political pressure. He stood slowly and the entire hall fell silent. His voice was deep and resonant as he began to speak. He explained that the tribunal had carefully reviewed all evidence presented during the proceedings. He said they had examined the old Federation charter and confirmed its legal validity. He stated that the laws governing challenges to galactic leadership had never been properly repealed and therefore remained in full effect. Corthan then addressed the specific claims made by humanity. He confirmed that the evidence proved humans had made extraordinary contributions to galactic society across multiple fields. He stated that the documentation showed a clear pattern of systematic suppression and theft of human achievements. He declared that humanity had met every requirement specified in the ancient charter for challenging galactic leadership. The tribunal's decision was unanimous and final. According to the old Federation charter, humanity had the legal right to assume leadership of the galaxy effective immediately. Corthan's words echoed through the hall, and for a moment nobody moved or spoke. Then chaos erupted. Some representatives stood and cheered while others shouted in protest. Reporters rushed to transmit the news across the galaxy. Jake felt Amy grab his arm in excitement and saw Lisa smile with tears in her eyes. Supreme Chancellor Vextar rose from his seat with fury written across his face. He waited for the noise to subside and then, spoke in a voice filled with contempt. He declared that the tribunal's decision was invalid because it relied on ancient laws that no longer applied to modern galactic governance. He stated that the Empire did not recognize the authority of the old Federation Charter. He announced that humanity's challenge was rejected and that any attempt to claim leadership would be considered an act of rebellion. Vextar's words sent shockwaves through the assembly. Corthan responded immediately, stating that the tribunal's decision was legally binding and could not be rejected by any individual or governing body. He warned that refusing to comply with the tribunal's ruling would violate the fundamental principles of galactic law. Vextar dismissed this warning and ordered security forces to remove the human team from the hall. Armed guards began moving toward the center platform where Jake and his team stood. Rick spoke quietly into his communication device, and suddenly, every screen in the hall switched to display a new image. The screen showed human fleet vessels moving into position around key worlds throughout the Empire. Rick's voice carried across the hall as he explained that human military commanders had been preparing for this possibility. He stated that human forces controlled strategic positions across dozens of systems. He made it clear that any attempt to suppress the tribunal's decision by force would be met with immediate resistance. Vextar ordered the military to engage the human fleets, but Commander Zafon hesitated. Rick displayed tactical assessments showing that human forces had superior positioning, and that any military confrontation would result in massive casualties on both sides. More importantly, the screen showed that several alien species had already begun transmitting messages of support for the tribunal's decision. The Valdrin Home Fleet had announced it would not participate in any action against humanity. The Corvan Defensive Forces declared they would remain neutral. Even some Empire loyalist species were questioning whether they wanted to fight a war over a legal decision that appeared legitimate. Jake watched as the situation unfolded with a mixture of hope and terror. He had never imagined their challenge would come to this. Lisa stood beside him, speaking urgently with other representatives trying to find a peaceful resolution. Amy was communicating with medical facilities across the galaxy, many of which were announcing their support for human leadership. The hall had become a battleground not of weapons but of information and influence. Then something unexpected happened. A representative from the Zentari world stood and requested permission to speak. His name was Kelvin, and he was a senior member of their governmental council. Kelvin addressed the assembly and spoke about the respiratory syndrome treatment that had saved countless Zentari lives. He said his own daughter had been dying from the disease until human researchers found a cure. He stated that his people had honored the wrong heroes and that this injustice shamed them. Kelvin announced that the Zentari worlds officially recognized humanity's right to galactic leadership under the old Federation Charter. His declaration prompted others to stand. A Palaxian trade minister spoke about human mediators who had resolved a devastating economic conflict. A Thorian military officer described how human tactical advice had helped them defend against pirates when Empire forces had failed to respond. One by one, representatives from different species rose to share stories of human contributions that had directly benefited their worlds. The weight of testimony became impossible to ignore. Vextar watched his support crumbling and made a final desperate move. He announced that he was declaring a state of emergency and assuming absolute authority. He stated that the tribunal was dissolved and that any species supporting the human challenge would face economic sanctions and military intervention. It was a naked grab for power that violated even the Empire's own laws. Several of his own council members looked shocked at this pronouncement. Corthan stood again and spoke with cold authority. He declared that Vextar had just demonstrated exactly why the Empire's current leadership was unfit to govern. By refusing to accept a legitimate legal decision and threatening member species, Vextar had proven that the Empire ruled through fear rather than justice. Corthan called for an immediate vote among all representatives on whether to enforce the tribunal's decision. The vote was conducted electronically to ensure accuracy and prevent intimidation. Each representative entered their decision privately, and the results were compiled by automated systems that could not be manipulated. Jake held his breath as the counting proceeded. The screens displayed the totals in real time, and he watched the numbers climb. Species after species voted to enforce the tribunal's decision and recognize humanity's right to leadership. When the final count appeared, the result was overwhelming. More than 70% of member species voted to uphold the tribunal's ruling. The old Federation Charter was officially recognized as valid and binding. Humanity's challenge was accepted. The Empire's current leadership was required to step down immediately and transfer authority to human representatives. Vextar stood frozen as he realized he had lost. His threats had backfired by showing the galaxy exactly what kind of leader he was. His refusal to accept the legal decision had cost him the support, even of species that might have been sympathetic. He had given the representatives no choice but to support humanity or accept that the Empire was a dictatorship rather than a legitimate government. Commander Zephon was the first high-ranking Empire official to accept reality. He stood and announced that the military would comply with the tribunal's decision. He stated that Empire forces would stand down and would not interfere with the transfer of power. Zephon looked directly at Vextar as he spoke, and his message was clear. The military would not support a dictator who rejected legitimate legal authority. Other officials followed Zephon's lead. The Minister of Commerce announced his compliance. The Director of Communications did the same. Within an hour, the entire administrative structure of the Empire had accepted the tribunal's decision. Vextar sat alone in his elevated seat, stripped of power and authority. He had built his career on controlling others, but now nobody would follow his orders. Lisa approached the center platform and spoke to the assembly. She thanked the representatives for their courage in upholding the law. She promised that humanity would govern with justice and fairness. She stated that the new government would be based on the principles of the old Federation Charter, where merit and contribution determined leadership rather than military might or poli.